Thanks everyone for coming. I think we've got a pretty exciting discussion that we're about to have today, so looking forward to it. Nearly every state in the country faces a daunting crisis. They have a pool of chronically underperforming schools, which are responsible in large part for low levels of academic performance and high dropout rates. The Obama administration notes that the lowest performing 10% of schools in the country are responsible for more than half of the dropouts. And it's such a problem that these schools have been labeled dropout factories. But if these schools are chronically underperforming, then the remedies of the past will fail to produce improvements if tried again. And if the status quo has been failing millions of our nation's children over the past 4.5 decades, then the status quo in operation in these dropout factories and chronically underperforming schools are losing generations of children entirely. Look, you might all think that the hottest turnaround model in the country right now is the Detroit Lions. But, thank you. I have a sneaking suspicion that Jim Schwartz borrowed a bit of our panelists' playbooks today. They have changed the game fundamentally and are providing hope and opportunity for children once trapped in underperforming schools. I'm really excited about our discussion here today because at its core, I think our three panelists' efforts to turn around poor performing schools and districts is rooted in the idea that markets, not monopolies, will best serve the needs of children and families. They have added to the growing number of educational options becoming available to families across the country. They are part of the reason that the Wall Street Journal deemed 2011 the year of school choice. So I want to introduce each of our panelists in succession, and then I'm just going to let them take it away. They have so much interesting information to give to us today. Ben Austin is the Executive Director of Parent Revolution, which fights to transform failing public schools through community organizing. And he has successfully succeeded in shifting power to parents in the debate over education policy reform. Mr. Austin successfully directed the campaign that passed California's historic parent trigger law. Austin is a former member of the California Board of Education and helped craft education reform policy as a deputy mayor to LA Mayor Richard Riordan. As senior advisor to Rob Reiner in the First Five California, he helped create LA Universal Preschool. Mr. Austin is a graduate of UC Berkeley and Georgetown Law School. Paul Pastorek is a member emeritus of Chiefs for Change, having served as Louisiana's State Superintendent of Education from 2007 until 2011. He served on the State Board of Elementary and Secondary Education from 1996 until 2004, including the last 3 years as president of the board. In 2004, Pastorek formed Next Horizon, a nonprofit organization that serves as a statewide think tank to connect Louisiana's leadership as a force supporting school improvement. Previously, he served as general counsel to National Aeronautics and Space Administration. A licensed attorney, Pastorek has been associated with the law firm Adams & Reese for more than 27 years. And Tim Melton is the VP of Legislative Affairs for nonprofit education advocacy group Students First, and a former 3-term Democrat state representative in the Michigan legislature. During his time in the legislature, Tim served in multiple leadership roles, including chair of the House Education Committee, authoring and driving bipartisan statewide education reforms that positively changed the face of education in Michigan. Tim's education reform efforts resulted in the passage of Promise Zone legislation and the implementation of Race to the Top legislation that created a process for addressing Michigan's lowest performing schools, which included the ability of the state to take over the worst performing schools and implement immediate research-driven reform, which included superseding the local collective bargaining agreements, not supersizing it. So I'll turn it over to Ben Austin now to kick it off. Thank you.
Man, I really wish, timing is everything. I wish I had a witty comment about that, but yeah, the moment's passed. But we'll try to get back to the supersizing your contract. So I just want to talk briefly and not take up a ton of time so we can have some question and answer about the parent trigger, about what it is, the theory of change behind it, and where we go from here, where this movement is hopefully going to take us. So the parent trigger, as we talked about, is a really simple law. It just says that in any systemically failing school, in California, there's a parent trigger in California, Texas, and Mississippi now. But the California law, which kind of led the way, it says that any school has been failing to meet AYP for 4 or more years, they are parent trigger eligible. California, there's 1,300 schools that fall into that category, and most of them have been failing for a lot more than 4 years. The theory of change behind it is really simple. Is that you've got 2 people here who have spent a lot of time on the inside. Many people in this audience. I have, as Lindsay said, I've been a deputy mayor in Los Angeles. I worked in the Clinton White House. And up until about a year ago, I was on the California State Board of Education. And I think most people here would agree that, when I was on the state board, I used to try to vote the right way. And that didn't always mean voting against the teachers' union in favor of charters. I voted to shut down a lot of charter schools I would never send my own kids to. But the idea behind it, the way I tried to vote was, I have 2 young daughters, Fiona and Eloise, and I tried to vote, cast every vote as if it would affect them. And within a year, I got kicked off the State Board of Education. But the lesson for me was not that if I hadn't gotten kicked off the State Board of Education, that everything would be fine. I think most people here would agree with that. And it's because no matter how you vote, no matter what you do, the system is designed to defend itself against change. It's calcified, it's rigged. And so the theory of change behind parent trigger is really simple. It is transfer power from the defenders of the status quo to parents, because parents have totally different incentive structures than everybody else and a totally different sense of urgency. Everybody talks about kids. Everybody does press conferences with kids, sound bites about kids. But if you talk about a kids first agenda in an intellectually honest way, where you filter every single decision, every single vote, every single syllable of a union contract through the lens of whether you would make that same decision if it literally affected your own children, a kids first agenda is one of the most radical political agendas in America. And so if the goal really is a kids first agenda, not a soundbite kids first agenda, but a real kids first agenda, then the only way we're going to get there is to transfer power to the only people who only care about kids. Everyone cares about kids, but parents are the only people who only care about kids. So how did this happen? In Los Angeles, it started as a real grassroots movement. And I think it makes sense that it started that way in Los Angeles, because unlike a lot of cities or states where there is real leadership, Los Angeles, because of our diffuse governance system, it just wasn't possible, and it benefited the teachers union and the defenders of the status quo. And so parents began to kind of look around at each other and say, there's no one coming to our rescue. The average kid in LA has a 50% chance of dropping out and an 11% chance of going to college. It's just not good enough for my kids, your kids, or anybody's kids. And so on the day of Obama's inauguration, Parent Revolution, we put a video on our website. And it was really simple. And we were a tiny organization at the time. We're still pretty small. And all the video said was, if you organize half the parents at your school, we'll guarantee you a great school. And we really, frankly, had no idea what we were talking about. But it sparked kind of a crazy movement. And parents started to organize. And one thing led to another, and better to be lucky than good, right about then was when President Obama announced his Race to the Top initiative. And for the first time in California history, we had a legislature that was incentivized to do something that at least seemed like reform. And so, a long story short, we knocked on doors, flooded the Capitol with parents, and got a parent trigger put into the Race to the Top bill. And all it really was a legal codification of that video we made. I'm not a good lawyer like Paul. I'm a lawyer, and so we just wrote up some language and put it in. I don't think anybody thought it had any chance of passing, but flooded the Capitol with parents. The media started to pay attention, and we passed it by one vote in both houses of the legislature. So after that, we looked around. We were like, what do we do now? We were a tiny organization at the time. I was a part-time executive director, and we had 2 employees. And so we began to try to figure out how to implement this law. My background really is mostly in democratic progressive politics. And I reached out to friends of mine who were former union organizers, brought them in, and we began a process to basically unionize parents. Use this as, for all intents and purposes, card check for parents. And so the first campaign that we did was in Compton, California, at an elementary school called McKinley Elementary, where the average child had a 1.5% chance of going to college. We organized parents on December 7th of last year, turned in petitions representing 62% of the parents at McKinley Elementary to turn it into a high-performing charter school. And instead of the district embracing parent involvement, it, for all intents and purposes, attempted to use harassment and intimidation to bully parents into giving back their signatures. A number of the parents who signed that petition were undocumented, and the district quite cynically tried to use their immigration status against them to bully them into giving their petitions back. We luckily, a law firm, Kirkland & Ellis, agreed to represent those parents for free. They sued, went to court, won a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction against the entire school district of Compton Unified for literally violating the constitutional rights of its own parents. God, love them. So going forward, so while all that was happening, I had gotten removed from the State Board of Education when Jerry Brown got elected. And that was a pretty naked attempt by the teachers union to derail Parent Trigger. Our board was about to approve the final Parent Trigger implementing regulations that would have prevented Compton from doing what they were doing. 5 days later, we got removed. But what happened, it turned into quite a good thing. Parents in Compton and then in surrounding cities began to organize. 4 different times, there were State Board of Education hearings, and parents, and they were, Los Angeles and Sacramento are about 8 hours away from each other, and the hearings in Sacramento were at 9 in the morning. And so 4 different times, parents met at a black church in Compton at midnight, got in buses, drove all night in order to testify on behalf of their children, in order to testify as to why this new board, I was replaced by the chief lobbyist for the teachers union, why this new board should not repeal Parent Trigger. Long story short, the board just about a month ago approved Parent Trigger regulations that were much better than we would have gotten when I was on the board. And it really is, I think, a study in how community organizing, how grassroots politics, how genuine empowerment can change the game in politics even when you're up against an opponent that can outspend you by a factor of hundreds to 1. And I think what was so convincing to this board was not that a bunch of parents drove overnight. It was that they were not wind-up robots, that they knew exactly how this law impacted their kids. They knew exactly what they wanted and what they didn't want. They were all low income, mostly all black and brown, but they were deeply educated about this because Parent Trigger has an immediate impact. It's not a bank shot. We're not talking about high-minded public policy. We're talking about giving parents power over the educational destiny of their own children right now. And that's the game changer. So going forward, what we're now doing is we're forming parent union chapters at Parent Trigger eligible schools across California. We have 11 parent union chapters now in Los Angeles. San Diego and Sacramento are about to form a couple. And these are real organizations unto themselves with elected leadership. They file papers with the Secretary of State. They're independent organizations from us and from the school. And we spend a lot of time training them in community organizing so they can collect the signatures. We spend a lot of time training them in geeky education reform issues so they can bargain intelligently on behalf of their children. And what many of them are doing is organizing, not initially to turn the petitions in, but organizing to bargain. Organizing to get to 50%, sit with the school district, sit with the teachers union, and say, for the first time in American history, we have the power to fire you. So what are you going to do for us? We want a reform contract. We want freedom from the district bureaucracy. We want whatever else is going to serve our children right now. Parent Trigger Now is passed in Texas, in Mississippi. Apparently just passed out of Education Committee in Michigan yesterday on a 3-2 vote. And it's turned into a movement. And so the last thing to say is that it's not only, I think, a game changer on the ground in terms of transforming failing schools in real time, but it's a game changer in terms of how we all converse about education and education reform. That I think that one thing that our side tends to do, what we do a disservice to ourselves, is we talk about education reform as if everybody in America has taken a seminar at the Kennedy School of Government. And while LIFO, reform union contracts, direct funding, et cetera, those are all critically important policies, you know, average person's eyes glaze over. And that inures to our detriment because we're the ones who are on the right side of the issue. We're the ones fighting for a kids first agenda. So it allows the other side to fight to a draw. But what they can't fight to a draw when the argument is this simple, about giving parents power over the education of their own children so they can make education serve the interests of children rather than the interests of powerful adults. And so plenty of problems, flaws in that theory of change too. Happy to unpack them as well. But we were just talking, feel very, very lucky to sit with this panel here and with you guys because this is an incredible moment that we all get to live in and participate in. You know, looking forward to a discussion with you all today.
Terrific. Terrific. Well, I'm Paul Pastorek from New Orleans. Until 5 months ago, I was the state superintendent of education. I can say things now a lot more freely, though I didn't really hold my opinions too close when I served. But I do have to say I'm honored to be with both of these gentlemen on the panel today. Ironically, I'm a Republican. They are Democrats, but we are all for children first. And we are all experiencing the same kind of failure in our respective geographies, and we're all experiencing the same kind of resistance from the established interests. So I want to argue today as a lawyer. You're a damn good lawyer, by the way. Look at what you've accomplished, Ben. You're way too modest. But I'm going to argue, as a lawyer would argue, there is no way to negotiate with the established interests. There is no way to negotiate with them. Their objectives are about adults, not about kids. And any quarter that you give them will be to protect adults. And I am, frankly, tired of the protectionistic attitudes around adults. And the system is designed to be extremely virulently resistant to change. It is a monopoly. It is a protected monopoly. There are huge numbers of laws which protect teachers, huge numbers of laws which protect principals, huge numbers of laws which protect school board members, school superintendents. There are no laws that protect them on the same order of magnitude that protect children on the same order of magnitude. There are none. And so when you stand up for children, you're going to be up against an incredible establishment that has many, many protective forces out there to beat you back. So in New Orleans, for about 20 years, I had been working as a volunteer in my law firm with an inner city school. I realized I could get nowhere with the principal. I had a conversation with her. I said, how many kids in this junior high school, 1,100, all African American, 95% poor kids, how many kids are on grade level? About 30% were above the 3rd grade level in this 7th to 9th high school, junior high school. I said, what are you doing about this situation? She said, I'm focusing on those 30%. Now, at the time, we had social promotion, and I became an ardent advocate for high-stakes testing. And we adopted that in Louisiana in 1996. But still, this system in New Orleans was so resistant to change that we were the lowest performing school district in the state. We were on par with Detroit. We were in the bottom of the pack nationally. And nothing changed. As hard as I fought, as hard as I tried to negotiate, I moved from the principal to the area superintendent. I went to the Chamber of Commerce. We negotiated. We went to the superintendent. Then we worked on getting school board members elected. We've had 4 years, every 4 years for the past 24 years in New Orleans, a complete new slate. The Excellence in Education slate of school board members. And every time when they become school board members, they lose their mind. Nothing improved in New Orleans, nothing, until Katrina came along. And the Democratic governor made up her mind. She was much maligned for how she handled Katrina. But she made up her mind she was going to clean up the New Orleans public schools. She took over the schools in a state takeover. Now, there have been state takeovers before, and they almost all fail. There's a reason why they fail, but her idea was different, and it is succeeding in New Orleans. Now, why have they failed? State takeovers. Because what we do is we replicate the same damn system in the state takeover as the system that we're taking over. So we hire a new superintendent to report to the state, and that superintendent now has to operate in the same monopolistic, protectionistic, legalistic, legal protection environment that they had to before. How do you expect? What do you think, this guy's Superman? They're going to change things? You can't change a vessel that's traveling in a pathway when you have no control over the steering of the vessel. It's going to run ashore. So state takeovers where you just simply change the superintendent out and have the superintendent report to the governor or whomever do not work. So what did Kathleen Blanco do different? She said the state will take over the schools, but we will require that every employee who works in the schools must reapply for their job. Period. You no longer have an entitlement to a job. I don't care whether you have tenure, collective bargaining, all of that went on the sideline. And let me tell you, it raised holy hell. But when you tell the community that they have an opportunity to reset the table, does this sound like Parent Trigger on steroids?
Supersized.
Supersized.
Well played.
The second thing she did that was really remarkable is she said, we are going to try not to run the schools from the state level. We're going to create charter schools. Now, when we first started this, everybody turned around and looked and said, where are the charter schools? I don't see any. How are we going to turn 100 schools in the city of New Orleans into charter schools overnight? And the answer is it's not going to happen overnight. But over 5 years now, we have 80% of the schools in the city of New Orleans that are charter schools. 80%. Now, you saw that little commercial that they played this morning at breakfast with the lady buying the milk? In New Orleans now, if you ride around during admissions time when people seek to get their kids into school in the February-March timeframe, there are signs all over the yards and the neutral grounds, we call them, the avenues, everywhere you look, advertising schools. My school's an all-male school. My school's a calculus school. My school's a sports school, a chess school, whatever. It's so bad. The advertising is so bad that the legislators call me up and complain to me and tell me, you got to get those signs off. I said, dude, this is the best thing that's ever happened to us. This is competition. People are competing for the privilege of educating children. My. People compete for the privilege of educating children. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 14,500 school districts in the United States of America. Do adults compete for the privilege of educating the millions of children? They do not. Hardly ever. Hardly anywhere, and certainly not on the scale that we're talking about in New Orleans. Those two pieces, emptying out the buildings and making everybody reapply and having a specific focus on chartering schools, has led to the most growth we've ever seen in the city of New Orleans public schools. It's rising at 2 and 3 times the growth at the state level. Stanford University has evaluated this. If you want to look it up, do so. It's called the CREDO report, C-R-E-D-O. They're still doing studies. Now, here's the amazing strategy that we're employing there. If you're a school and you do well, you get more schools. If you're a school and you do poorly, you don't do business anymore. You go out of business. Let's see. People compete for kids. People compete to stay in business, and people compete to expand their business. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it is dramatic what is happening. We just had a big powwow, and there's still extreme pressures pushing back on it. Extreme national pressures pushing back on it. We just had a big roundup in the city. They had a huge confab, brought all the parents in, and some of the parents said, I don't have choice. You're right. We still don't have 100% choice in Louisiana, but those whose kids were going to charter schools, parents who never spoke up before, are demanding that this not go away. It is a radical approach. It says, this is the basic bottom line to summarize, monopolies must die. Monopolies do not serve us well in any other. We put monopolies out of business. AT&T, gone. Microsoft was broken up. All of these companies are broken up, but not the 14,500 geographic exclusive monopolies. And I will tell you, there are a whole lot of people in Louisiana who don't like it. Don't think you can do charter schools one at a time, ladies and gentlemen. Don't think you can do it. The system, just like it was trying to eat up Ben, and the system was trying to push back, file lawsuits, they file lawsuits against districts where we try to put in charter schools. You got to do it. You got to have the courage. You got to be so fed up. You got to be so mad as hell. You got to say, we're going to do it right from the beginning. Clear the deck. Bring in charter operators. Give the ones that succeed more schools. Give the ones that don't, no harbor. And watch what happens to your community. Thank you.
I got nervous sitting next to Paul. He took his coat off, rolled up his sleeves. He was ready to go to battle, I thought. So And Lindsay, I want to thank you. I'm originally from Detroit, the Lions. I owe you a cup of coffee. We've been the blunt of jokes throughout the entire country for years, so I'm just happy to revel in a little victory every now and then. I'm probably the most unlikely person on this panel. I was elected in the state legislature in Michigan 5 years ago. Democrats took control of the House. I went to the Speaker, who I was on the right side of the election. Before I start, how many legislators do we have? Okay, so you'll appreciate some of this story coming in. So I was on the right side of the Speaker's election. I went to the Speaker. I was one of his early supporters as a freshman, and I said, Mr. Speaker, now that we've won, I'd like to chair the Commerce Committee. And he says, well, Representative Melton, you're a freshman, and most freshmen don't get to, why don't you think about it over the weekend, but I think I have something else in mind for you. I'd like you to chair the Education Committee. I said, well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to chair Commerce. So I went home over the weekend and called up some of my former legislators that I knew and people I looked up to, and they said, Representative, the first thing you need to realize when the Speaker asks you to do something, just say, thank you, Mr. Speaker, I can't wait to serve. And so I learned that over the weekend, so I called the Speaker Monday morning and said, Mr. Speaker, I can't wait to serve. It's an honor to be the chair of education. So I came in as a Democrat in an urban community. There was a post-industrialized Pontiac, Michigan, struggling school district. And I said I'm going to take all the biases of being a Democrat away. And I'm going to just research education for the next 6 months to figure out what works. And I asked myself a couple questions. Number one, can kids in areas of high poverty learn? Number two, do we know what works? And number three, do we have the political will to do what needs to be done? So those are the questions that I asked myself. So number one, can the kids in areas of high poverty learn? Yes, we all know they can learn. Actually, they're some of the brightest kids in the country based on the circumstances that they're given. Number two, do we know what works? That led me during that time to Louisiana. Paul was very helpful to me in my endeavors by lending me Paul Vallis to come up and testify and do press conferences with us while we were pushing. And number three, did we have the political courage? So that was the toughest thing. Being in a Democratic majority with a Democratic governor and a Republican Senate, one of the most difficult challenges I had was after we've ingrained ourselves in knowing what we worked and the political courage debate is pushing my caucus and my governor to do what needed to be done in the state. So I think all legislators, you need to be strong. You need to be someone that is in this for the right reason, and you're not going to take no for an answer because you're right on the issue. And you need to realize that. We are right on this issue. My hometown of Pontiac was one of the best school districts in the state of Michigan for a period of time. Now it's probably one of the worst. It ranks up there with the city of Detroit. And one of my high schools had a 5% proficiency in math, 11% proficiency in English. Every single teacher in the building was rated exemplary. The highest rating you could receive. Some of those teachers in the contract weren't even evaluated every year. Once you received tenure, you didn't have to be evaluated except once every 3 years. So as a business person and a small business owner, previous to that, I looked at this model and said, this is not right. How could we operate our school system this way? So I was in a bar, not drinking. Wasn't happy hour. We read the articles, right? Opposition research. But we pulled out a napkin, and I started crafting what we were going to do in Michigan. And I had to fold it out, though, twice, because it got so big. And actually, a friend of mine back in Michigan has framed this napkin, because I took it to the Speaker, and he laughed at me, and he said, there's no way you can get this through our caucus or the governor will sign this. And then it took us about 1.5 years to actually get to the point that we took our first votes. This is prior to Obama being elected. We were race to the top before race to the top even existed. And as a Democrat, the president gave us all the cover you would think we would need. Not true. The ingrained interest that Paul talks about, and Ben, they don't want any change whatsoever. And I went to the unions and I said, look, my school district went from 27,000 kids to 5,800. I said, you've lost 2/3 of your members. It's in your self-interest to take the change, own it, because you're going to increase your membership. And they didn't want to hear any of that. So we went the route of going after, the special interest and the interest of adults and putting students first. And we obviously looked all over the country. We went to Chicago, we went to LA, went to Miami, went to Atlanta. We went all over, went to DC, and we put together a package that we thought made sense. And I hate to say we had to dumb it down, but we had to dumb it down. We had to make it very simple. We did sort of the Rotherham smart cap on charters. We did that. And I just told my Democratic caucus, look, we're going to close the bad charters down, and the good ones we're going to let expand in areas of high need. It's that simple. And when we did our failing school legislation, we made the worst performing schools, the criteria so bad that our argument was nobody could defend these schools. Nobody in their right mind could get in front of a microphone and say, we're not going to accept change because these schools were so bad. So our legislation, House Bill 4787, that was passed a couple years ago, identified the 94 worst performing schools in the state. And these were schools that they just didn't fail for 3 or 4 years. It happened over decades, probably 30 to 40 years, 94 of them. Every single school on that list was in a Democratic House district. Every single one. So I'm in caucus arguing to my colleagues. Shouldn't have to argue about this. These are your kids. These are your constituents' kids. And you're the one fighting reform? This just did not make sense to me that the Democrats should have owned education reform. We should have went with the president and had all the ground cover that we needed and took the unions on right between the eyes. And again, they backed down. We ended up getting a lot of stuff passed in Michigan. We had to twist and turn with our governor, who just was rewarded with a talk show about politics, which I find really interesting. I don't know if we're going to watch or not, but I would, just for the entertainment value. So as we went through this process, we had all these public hearings. We created research books this thick. I gave to every single member of our caucus and the education committee. I held special meetings. Now, legislators are known for not reading bills. I guarantee you they did not read the research. But the research books were that thick. All, spiral bound, I gave them to all of them. I knew when they said the union arguments that I said, look, I gave you all of the research out there. These are every single policy that we're going to push is backed by research. Now, I know none of them read it, but it gave us our, killed a lot of trees, but it made sense at the time. What was interesting is we had superintendents, we pushed the once-a-year evaluations, and the superintendents behind the scenes came to me and said, Representative, we're going to testify opposed to that. I said, are you out of your mind? Are you publicly going to take the stand and say, we are opposed to evaluating our teachers at least annually? And they said, yeah, we can't do it. I said, then you take the stand, because I'm going to alert the media. We're going to have every major news outlet here, and that's what we did. And they got blasted. How can, in the real world, if you're going to take any type of real world experience and put it into the schools, we evaluate our people quarterly. Sometimes, I evaluate my staff on a weekly basis, to be honest with you, but we're not going to evaluate except once every 3 years. It just did not make sense. But all this argument, charter schools, evaluations, merit pay, closing down the worst operators, I put in a red herring, a bill that said year-round schooling. And in Michigan, we have one of the most archaic laws around Labor Day start. So you can't start school until after Labor Day in Michigan because it could hurt the tourism industry. Now, all of these hearings, hearing after hearing, week after week, we didn't get a lot of play. There wasn't a lot of argument. People were, I wouldn't say they were asleep in committee, but it just wasn't gaining a lot of attention. When I posted the bill about Labor Day start, the entire chamber was packed. Hotel people, theme park people, fishermen for charters, the place was packed. How dare you want to do? And everybody focused their attention on this little aspect that I wasn't going to push it anyway, but it was the red herring. And I think as legislators think about process and strategy, you're going to have to throw out some bills to take the attention away from what you really want to get done. Nice. And it's true. You got to throw enough balls in the air that can't be caught. And I will tell you, there are some red button issues that the opposition is going to just go right to, and you're going to be able to sneak, I don't want to say sneak through, but you're going to get a lot of stuff done.
Sneak.
Yeah, and I will tell you, payroll protection works. You can get anything you want done if you throw out a bill on payroll deduction for union dues. Throw the bill out, and I will tell you, every teacher union will focus on that and nothing else. because that affects their pocketbook. It's self-preservation. That's something that you can use as a tool. And my organization, Students First now, and I say it's unlikely that I'd be here, I just left the legislature a month ago. There was an opportunity that arose with this organization to do this on a national level, and I said, I'm going to run with this. Packed up my family from Michigan, and so the Tigers make the playoffs, the Lions are undefeated, the Wolverines are undefeated, and at some point my friend said, you're the reason why. As soon as you decide to leave the state, everybody is undefeated. So I had to get DirecTV out here to watch my Lions. This can be done. It's not going to be easy, but you're on the right side of the issue. Mobilization of parents. We walked in this morning, and there's a person holding up a sign. I'm thinking it's Occupy San Francisco. She's protesting us. And I'm thinking, where are the parents at? I think the name of this is, fed up with failure. One thing we need to do a better job of doing is finding out why those parents in Pontiac didn't protest at 5% proficiency in math and 11% proficiency in English, and every teacher was rated the best. We have got to do a better job with the grassroots and the mobilization and letting people know, why aren't our churches being more active? I represented a majority minority district, and every Sunday I was at a different church making this plea across my community. And finally, my ministers got on board and said, you're right, these are our kids. How dare the Democratic Party hijack our kids' futures? And look, the fact of the matter is when I got elected, they said, bring jobs, bring jobs, bring jobs. I said, look, I can bring you jobs, but they're not going to hire our kids because they're not prepared for the new workforce. I lived in a community that a 10th grade education could get you a job at Pontiac Motors where you could have 2.5 kids, a white picket fence, and a house up north. Those days are over. And this country has fallen behind on a world perspective. We're no longer in the top third of education. We're in the bottom third. And we can't survive as a country. This issue needs to be owned by us. We need to mobilize these parents, and we need strong legislators to not be afraid to take this challenge on, Republicans and Democrats throughout this country. It has to be bipartisan for this to have life long term. And I will tell you, our opposition, if they don't win legislatively, they will try to win with implementation. So the battle is over. Do not do a victory lap once you get a bill passed and it's signed by the governor, because you have to be more diligent after with the implementation, because they will find a way, one way or the other. They've got a lot of lawyers and a lot of staff members being paid a lot of money to find a way to stop any advancement that we make. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great, well, thank you all. We're going to open it up for questions. If you just please come to the mic at the center to ask a question. It is interesting, Tim. I think that's a similar strategy. Tom Luna, the Idaho superintendent, said he was able to really push through a lot of the great reforms Idaho did because Scott Walker in Wisconsin was taking all those slings and arrows. So it's a good strategy.
Thank you, Antonio Parkinson, representative out of Tennessee. I have a question for Paul. What was the measure, or how did you guys measure, or have you measured the success with going to 80% charter schools, and what's the outcome of that?
We did not have a measure about using charter schools before we decided to use charter schools as the model. So in other words, and most of us know that nationally there's no real demonstration that charter schools are per se better than traditional schools. But what we believed was people will not come to work in the existing New Orleans school system with the structure that we had. Really high quality, talented people. People would come to work if you created these autonomous schools where entrepreneurs could run the schools. That was the theory. So we didn't have evidence. Now, we had measures of academic achievement, and we had scores for schools and rates of proficiency of kids. And we looked at those rates, and I can tell you that before the storm and before we took these schools over, these were the worst schools in the entire state of Louisiana. And then after, now the Recovery School District, as a district, if you were to treat it like a district, it's a non-local geographic district, because we have schools we've taken over in Baton Rouge, We have schools we've taken over in Shreveport. In rural communities, it can be done in all, in my opinion. But when you look at the Recovery School District as its own district, it's not even the lowest performing district in the state anymore. It was when it took over. So we just believed in a model that said, how are you going to attract really high quality people to come into schools? And I'm not talking about just Teach for America, though Teach for America was attracted, or the new teacher project, they were attracted, and new leaders for new schools, they were attracted. All those people were attracted, but you know, there are a lot of good teachers who leave the system pretty damn quick. And the reason they leave the system pretty quick is because the system is a horrible place to work. So, you know, I hear these people talk about, oh, what are we going to do about the teachers? You know, 35% of the teachers after 3 years leave, 50% of the teachers after 5 years leave. They leave because they're working in a crappy school, run by crappy people who don't know what they're doing. Now listen, I'm not trying, let me tell you, I don't even blame the people. Now, you may think, and a lot of people think, oh, I'm blaming teachers, I'm blaming principals. The system that trained these people to become teachers and principals sucks too, okay? Now, we've actually made some radical changes in that system in our state. In fact, Arnie Duncan's getting ready to start a tour, and he's going to say Louisiana is the only system of teacher preparation programs in the country that actually measures the outcomes of the kids who are trained in the system and attributes them back to the preparation programs. And he's trying to get every state to adopt that. If you want to adopt a good rule, that's one to emulate. The problem is not the people. They're not fundamentally bad people. Principals and teachers are not fundamentally bad. But they're in a system that is fundamentally flawed and that does not allow them to do the work that they're supposed to do. A charter school allows people to create camaraderie, create an organization, not be told by the central office what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to do it, who to do it to. No, the principal creates this camaraderie and this enterprise in an entrepreneurial fashion. Let me just give you one little example. This is, you know, high schools are in urban environments are pretty ugly things, and they're no different in New Orleans. This young kid came with a Harvard master's degree in business administration, undergraduate degree at Columbia. To come down, we won't even certify him to be a principal. So we said, you can be the master, the headmaster, and you can run this charter school. He comes in there. He started the school in 9th grade, 10th grade, then he expands to 11th grade. When they needed teachers for the 11th grade, he put out a call for teachers, you know, just like everybody puts out a call and, you know, puts out advertisement. They needed about 12 teachers for the 11th grade that they were expanding to. Over 1,000 candidates applied to go to that school. That school starts with kids in the 4th grade, at the 4th grade reading level and math level on average, going into the 9th grade. Even with our high stakes testing, that's where they can be and still get into our 9th grade. Those kids pass the high school graduate exit exam by the end of the 10th grade in that particular school. Oprah has given this school $1 million. They've celebrated this school nationally. When you create an environment where people want to work, you attract them like magnets. And people who would work in the private schools leave the private schools to come work in the public schools. That's the magic of the charter school.
Just a quick follow-up. I guess what I'm trying to find out, you know, the New Orleans market and the Memphis market are fairly similar. And
Memphis? Yeah.
Memphis, right. And,
Yeah.
and I want to know specifically, has there been an improvement that you guys have measured by implementing, is it 80% charter schools in New Orleans now, or is
Yes.
80% statewide?
80% in New Orleans.
Okay, 80% charter schools in New Orleans. Has there been a measured outcome after you guys have put these schools into play that shows an increase in the level of education in New Orleans?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I'm going to refer to this CREDO report, C-R-E-D-O. Look it up online. Stanford University did an analysis. So it's an independent analysis, all right? I can show you all the State Department of Education data, but nobody believes it. So we got Stanford to come in and do this analysis. And in it, out of 16 analytical categories, poverty, race, disabilities, kids who are farthest behind, in 16 categories, out of 16, 15 showed higher rates of improvement than any schools in the state, period. And the academic achievement numbers are moving up in dramatic fashion. In fact, the metropolitan neighbor, we call it Jefferson Parish,
right,
the neighbor to New Orleans, is about ready to be eclipsed by the schools in the city of New Orleans.
That says a lot. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Thank you so much.
And Representative, follow up on that. One reason why we followed the Louisiana model is because they didn't allow for schools not to succeed. They closed them down and took away their ability to operate. So if they're not operating well and they're not seeing advancement, they just close them down. And that's what we did in Michigan as well.
And really, we're sort of cheating, aren't we? We're cheating in a way. We're saying, hey, that's a bad school. We're not going to count them anymore. Hey, that's a bad school. We're not going to count them. Why do you think the numbers are going up? Because we're not counting the bad schools. Now, we're not counting them and letting them operate. We're counting them and putting them out of business. And that's the key. So whatever you do in Memphis, and I'm very familiar with the challenges up there, whatever you do, in fact, if I could give, if you want to do another radical, simple piece of legislation, every school district in the United States, if they parent triggered their school or opened them up to charter school, if every district automatically every year took the bottom 2 schools in the district and said parent trigger or charter school, I guarantee you in 5 years we would eliminate the lowest 10% schools in the entire country of the United States. You just, in New Orleans, in the Recovery School District, whether you're a failing school or not, if you're we actually do with 4 schools. We say the bottom 4 schools, if you're in the bottom of the whole group, you can show all the growth in the world you want. Doesn't matter. You're out of business. You're out of business. And we're actually incubating schools, and this is another big piece of the success, is you can't just shut down a school on Monday and Friday and open it up on Monday. You have to incubate schools and grow them into being able to take over the schools.
One more piece of interesting legislation that you may want to think about that's kind of funny for legislators. I think if there was one piece of data I would want is for teachers that live in the district they teach, do they send their kids to that same school? I mean, it's like coming from Detroit. Do you buy GM or Ford if you work there? Well, that's the true test, right? So in the 80s, they stopped buying their own vehicles that they made. Find out, if there's any way in your state data system to find out the teachers that live in the district that they teach in, do they send their kids to the same school? That is the true identifier of a good school or not.
In fact, I have to pile on this. Sorry. When you're being beaten up by the teachers, not the unions, okay? Forget about the unions. Teachers are real good people and they're trying hard. When you're getting beaten up by them and they're going to be nervous and so on and so forth, you just ask them this question. If you were sending your kids to schools, what percentage of kids in the school you'd be sending it to would be acceptable to be below grade level? What percentage of the kids in the school building below grade level would be too much for you to send your kids to? So we measure everything in Louisiana by percentage of kids below grade level in every school. And so I asked the teachers everywhere I went around the state of Louisiana, would 20% of the kids below grade level in a school, would you want to send your kids to that school? Anybody who wants to send their kids to that school, raise your hand. In fact, I'm going to do it again here. Anybody in this room want to send your kids to a school where 20% of the kids are below grade level, please raise your hand. Okay, I don't see anybody here, and not one teacher anywhere in the entire state of Louisiana raised their hand. And yet, 70% of the schools in the state of Louisiana have more than 20% of the kids below grade level.
Okay, Larry.
Hi. Larry Sand, president of the California Teachers Empowerment Network. My question is mostly for Mr. Austin, although obviously everybody can answer it. Ben, you know I love the parent trigger. But do you see a day where you can sort of sit down with CTA and bang something out that's going to make everybody happy? Because I sure don't, and I don't think Mr. Pastorek does either.
Nope.
No. It just won't work. I would like to know how you feel about that.
So it's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what we're talking about, which is what all of us are talking about, which is a kids first theory of change. I should say that Larry has become a really important voice in this movement as a teacher advocating for kids first reform, and that gets to I think our theory of change, that if the goal is a kids first agenda, if the goal, like you said, is to filter every decision through the lens of whether you'd make that decision if it affected your own children, if the goal is to get to force the issue of what Paul brought up, would you send your own child to that school? The parents and teachers do, in fact, have a lot in common when it comes to a kids first agenda, because it is good for kids if teachers are paid a lot more money. It's good for kids if teachers are respected and empowered and not micromanaged by a bureaucrat who's never set foot in their classroom, never met their kids. What all the fireworks about is obviously it's also good for kids if teachers are held accountable for how well their children do. It's common sense. A kids first agenda, for the most part, is just common sense. And so if we're going to be real about this, I've seen both sides of this issue. As you know, Larry, like my background is Democratic politics. At a young age, I worked in the Clinton White House, my first impression about teachers' unions were that unions are good, teachers are good, ergo, teachers' unions must be good. And it was an iterative process for me to really learn how things work. And so let me talk about the politics on the ground and then the theory of change. The politics on the ground with regards to parent trigger are that parents are unionizing, that we're now organizing parents into parent union chapters at parent trigger eligible schools. As I said, we call it basically card check for parents. And they're unionizing for the most part to bargain. They're organizing to get to 50%. I think before the end of the year, we're going to see at least one school do this, maybe multiple schools. To get to 50%, sit down with the teachers union, sit down with the district bureaucracy, and say, look, guys, for the first time ever, we have the power to fire you unilaterally without asking your permission. So these are our list of demands. This is our definition of a kids first agenda. What's yours? And, they're going to react badly. We've already seen what the other side, the lengths to which the other side is willing to go, the moral boundaries that they seem quite willing to cross right over. I have spent a lot of time now in Compton, and I have seen parents who live in trailers, parents who live in housing projects, parents who live in homes that are being foreclosed on, threatened, intimidated, harassed, bullied by their own teachers. We had a situation where at the school that we did the Parent Trigger campaign at, the parents who signed the petition, their children were not allowed to go to the bathroom. And so what they did was they coordinated with the school nurse's office, and this was their strategy to get parents to give their petitions back. The children whose parents signed the petition were forced to pee in their pants. They got sent to the school nurse's office, and the school nurse was in charge of getting the rescissions when the parent had to come in to the classroom with new underwear. Those are the lengths to which the other side is willing to go. And so, Larry, I say that to say that I have absolutely no illusions about this. I have absolutely no illusions about the base instincts that we are dealing with on the other side and the lengths to which they will go and the power that they have and the ways in which they are willing to wield it. The parent trigger is not a panacea. It's not a magic wand. It's a theory of change. It's a way to give parents power. Parents, even if we do everything right, which we're not going to do, we're going to continue to make mistakes and hopefully learn from them. But even if we do everything right, parents are never going to have all of the power. But what Parent Trigger does is give parents an historic amount of power, an amount of power that they have never had before. And so they get to sit down and be treated like grown-ups for the first time ever, and speak in the language that the other side understands, which is money and power. You sit down and have a conversation about social justice, I think everybody knows where that'll go. And I think everybody knows that, I mean, the AFT, I think most people in this room probably know, American Federation of Teachers, last August, accidentally released their secret plan to kill Parent Trigger on their website. We were sitting in the office one day and we saw Rashawn Biddle had downloaded that, and we were like, is this this could not be true. Like, life isn't, I mean, again, better to be lucky than good. So thank you very much. And in their secret plan, there is a two-step process that they just lay out. It's written by their AFT lobbyists. They just lay it out. Plan 1 is overwhelm the other side with lobbyists and try to kill Parent Trigger before a grassroots movement can form. If they fail in Plan A, which they did in Connecticut, they shift to Plan B, which is create a fake committee, give it a fancy name like governance committee, but give it no power of any kind, so you can trick parents into thinking that they have power when they actually do not. These are the tactics that the other side is brazenly opening, in a very open way, embracing. So these are the people that we're negotiating with on the other side.
And it worked. It worked in Connecticut.
It did
too.
work in Connecticut.
Yes.
Didn't work in California. Didn't work in Texas. Didn't work in Mississippi. Now parents in Connecticut and across the country are a lot less naive. So, all a long way of saying that that's who we're dealing with, and we have been able to, without any lobbyists, without a lot of money, to outmaneuver them by playing on a different playing field. We have a saying at Parent Revolution that if you're don't play on the other side's home turf. Like, if you're sitting in a closed-door meeting with their lobbyists, then you're losing. Our home turf is community organizing and the marketplace of ideas. And so if they want to have a closed-door meeting, that's fine with us. We'll close the door, but we're going to invite a reporter in. And we're going to talk about kids. And so the other side is going to do what they're going to do. We can't stop that, but what we can do is speak in their language. We can speak in the language of money and power. And for the first time ever, parents have the ability to affect that. And so I think it's less useful, at least for me, to look at this from an ideological perspective. That teachers' unions are evil, teachers' unions are good. Teachers' unions are the problem, teachers' unions are the solution. They're doing their job. And part of the reason why they've gotten out of control is that there have been no checks and balances on them. And so what parents are doing is, around Parent Trigger, is organizing to create checks and balances. And parents, and we're spending a lot of time educating parents. Spending a lot of time educating parents, not just in community organizing, but in the nuances of all the stuff that these two panelists have talked about today. And in the tactics the other side's willing to use. We put out a Parent Power Handbook last month that includes AFT's entire plan, so that parents all know. And so don't have any illusions, but at the end of the day, they've got a tremendous amount of power, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. So we got to deal with it. The way our theory of change of dealing with it is to speak in their language and give parents the unilateral authority to fire them.
So I know everyone's eager to get a good seat at lunch, so maybe now we can move into a rapid-fire Q&A. Keep it under 20 seconds, your answers.
Tashara Jones, Assistant Minority Floor Leader in the state of Missouri. And I filed a hefty charter school reform bill last year that was maybe one vote from getting to the governor's desk. But one of the things that we're dealing with is we have 50 charters in Missouri. they're relegated to only St. Louis and Kansas City, and we're trying to develop good rules around closing charters and good procedures around closing bad charters. I wonder if you could speak to that.
If I could just say one thing really quickly, is that closing bad charter schools should have the same level of importance to the reform community as closing bad district schools, because they're both bad for kids. And when I was on the State Board of Education, we created the first regulation ever that forces the lowest 10% of charter schools every year to come up to the State Board for a revocation hearing, and voted against a lot of really bad charter schools that I would never send my own daughters to. And I got lobbied as hard on those votes as I did on the votes I voted against the teachers union. We need in the reform community to clean up our own house and be intellectually honest about a kids first agenda.
And within less than 20 seconds, I'd like to talk to you afterwards. We have a policy team that can help craft legislation for you. And on Parent Trigger, we have model legislation. So any legislators out there would like to see if this can fit into their own agenda, we can give you model legislation that you can take a look at to see how it fits into your state. And on the closing of charters, we can help